Shalom TV's exclusive television coverage of Israel in turmoil is made possible in part by Barbara and Arthur Wernicke, Gwen and Ken Asher, Edith Sammers and Ed Smith, Mimi and Saul Cohen, Eleanor and Mort Lowenthal, and Dr. Naomi Vilko, MD.
I'm Mark Golub. Thank you once again for joining us as we continue Shalom TV's exclusive television coverage of Israel's defensive war in Gaza, as Israel tries to put an end to Hamas's ability to rain rockets down on Israeli civilian populations, and as Israel tries to destroy Hamas's elaborate network of tunnels, which begin in Gaza but emerge inside Israel near kibbutzim or moshavim, where Hamas can kill tens and hundreds of children, women, and men, and from which they can kidnap civilians or soldiers to be held for the ransom of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons. And you know, we were with you just, it seems like a few hours ago last night. We're coming to you live right now from the Shalom TV studios. If you're watching this in its original broadcast, beginning at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the afternoon. And if you're watching one of the replays, then you understand this is a replay from Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And this is what the current war between Israel and Hamas is all about today. By the way, I should say, even as we are taping, Secretary of State Kerry is holding a press conference in which he is reporting that a possible ceasefire proposed by Qatar, which would also sort of put things on hold for a week, has gone nowhere. Hamas has not even responded. Hamas has not said a word about this proposal. Israel, which originally said it would consider it, is now saying that if Hamas won't even comment on it, Israel can't agree to a ceasefire, or even for a week, since it's in the middle of an operation, and that it's really unreasonable for Secretary Kerry and Ban Ki-moon of the United Nations to propose a one-week ceasefire when Hamas is not interested in any ceasefire. And as you know, Hamas has formally turned down 3 prior ceasefire proposals, one by Egypt, and the Arab League was involved. And it's always interesting that the issue is framed as if Israel is engaged in a military operation, and that Hamas is the poor victim, or certainly that the Palestinian people are being victims. Hamas has purposefully and willfully fired hundreds and thousands of rockets into Israel, each with the capability, each one has the capability of bringing destruction, injury, or death to Israeli civilians, and which certainly may traumatize children and adults for a long period of time. And finally, Israel has, with overwhelming popular support and almost unparalleled Israeli unity, launched defensive airstrikes and then ground troop operations in Gaza. And you know, on the one hand, it seems so obvious, so self-evident, that Israel is in the right to take defensive action against Hamas. And if you were with us last night, you heard author Ari Shavit, who writes for Haaretz, argue that in this conflict between Israel and Hamas, it's black and white. Hamas is black, Israel is white. That's Ari Shavit. But as obvious as this may be to most people, I see the story being spun very differently in some American newspapers and on some American news channels. And the best example right now of how the media is spinning the story has to do with Eugene Robinson, who's a columnist for the Washington Post. And he talked about the lead story today coming out of Gaza, which is the apparent Israeli bomb that hit a housing complex under UN control, where Palestinians were seeking refuge from Israeli airstrikes. And the Israeli bomb killed some 15 people, including children, injured many, many, many more. And Eugene Robinson, who's known to be very pro-Israel, criticized Israel on MSNBC and in the Washington Post for now going too far, using too much power against Hamas, and for engaging in immoral acts that have taken Palestinian lives. And in his Washington Post column, here's what Eugene Robinson wrote. The civilian death toll in Gaza from Israel's latest incursion is appalling. The right to self-defense is unalienable, but it is not free from moral constraints. And then he writes, I support Israel, I abhor Hamas, but unleashing such devastating firepower on a tiny, densely crowded enclave in which civilians are trapped and thus destined to become casualties is wrong by any reasonable moral standard. And that's Eugene Robinson writing in the Washington Post. By the way, we called Eugene Robinson and invited him to come on Shalom TV to discuss his piece. Unfortunately, today is not possible for him. We hope he'll speak with us sometime in the coming week. But as wrong as Robinson's criticism of Israel may be, no matter what lengths Israel has gone to try to minimize civilian casualties, and is totally justified in pursuing a war to end Hamas's assault on Israel, the fact is, people without a full understanding of the context of the current war may be swayed against Israel by this kind of reporting on Israel's use of force in Gaza. And that's what troubles me. It troubles me that on virtually a daily basis now, some of the American media are spinning the story to make Israel look as if it's needlessly causing pain, suffering, and death on innocent Palestinians who may be guilty of no more than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so even Eugene Robinson sees these visuals of Palestinian suffering and concludes that while Israel has, listen to him, Israel has the inalienable right to self-defense, Israel is engaging in is using an immoral amount of force. How does Israel respond to this portrayal of the Israeli-Hamas conflict? How does Israel answer the visuals of Palestinian suffering and the commentary that Israel is engaged in immoral use of force? For some answers, we spoke just a few moments before we went on the air with Paul Hirschson, spokesman for the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And as you listen to my conversation with Paul, pay special attention to the way the conversation abruptly comes to an end. Here is my conversation with Paul Hirschson. Paul Hirschson, thank you so much for giving us some time again.
Mark, lovely to be back. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, Paul, all over the American news today is this story about Israel hitting a housing project where United Nations school children were seeking refuge from Israeli airstrikes. Evidently, some 15 people were killed, including some children, injuring scores more. And the UN has charged that Israel had the GPS coordinates, and that therefore there was something irresponsible in this particular strike. Can you tell me what, at the moment, the IDF is saying, what Israel is saying, and what would you want us to know about this obviously tragic event?
No question, a tragic event, absolutely terrible, and again, once again, underlines the very reason why we didn't want to be in this conflict in the first place. This event is one which is under investigation. It's not at all clear who's responsible, as it were, for it. It may very well be an errant Israeli fire. There's a distinct possibility that it's the result of Hamas fire. We know of over 150 instances where Hamas rockets have not quite reached Israel and landed in the Gaza Strip. We've identified Hamas fire in the area. There was Hamas anti-tank firing from the vicinity of the school, which may explain a return fire by the Israelis. So an investigation is underway. We'll get to the bottom of it, but it's by no means clear at this point whether it was Israeli fire or Hamas fire. But if I may, I would like to take it back to where I started, and that is that this is precisely the reason why we didn't want to be in this conflict. Civilians on both sides of this conflict have been drawn into the crossfires of the fighting, and although we're confirming more and more the numbers, the large numbers of Hamas terrorists and those from a number of other terror groups, the Islamic Jihad and others, who have been killed. It's confirmed that over 250 thus far. We also have another number approaching 200 that we've not been able to confirm. But that leaves too many civilians who've been pulled in by a cynical military strategy of Hamas, which is almost as if they want to generate civilian casualties on both sides of this conflict. On the Israeli side because they hate us, and on their own side in order to be able to wage a public relations war against Israel.
Mm-hmm. Paul, I don't have to tell you how supportive everyone here at Shalom TV is of not only what Israel has been doing, but what we feel what Shalom TV feels Israel must do. And the discussion throughout the media and maybe in Israel as well is, how far is Israel going to go? And the sense we are getting is that Israel's attitude is we will stay at this until we have destroyed Hamas's capability of ever doing this again. And we also hear that there are some real discussions, and I think it's for the first time, Paul, of the international community heeding Prime Minister Netanyahu's call for a demilitarized Gaza. At the same time, the visuals we're seeing on CNN, on MSNBC, everywhere on American television, Paul, those are real. And the reality is, whether this school or that school was or was not hit by a specific Israeli rocket, the bottom line is, in this war, Israel is causing Palestinians to die. And unfortunately, I'm now speaking from my own perspective. I feel that the media has sort of latched onto this, and in today's Washington Post, a columnist who is very pro-Israel, Eugene Robinson, who appears all the time as a columnist on MSNBC's Morning Joe program, talks about how as supportive as he is of Israel, as supportive as he is of Israel's attempt not only to stop Hamas rockets, but also to destroy the tunnel infrastructure that we have now come to understand is so threatening to the state of Israel. While he totally supports that, he is now saying that ultimately the extent to which Palestinians are dying crosses a moral line, and that too much force is being used by the state of Israel. And I want you, as somebody who's representing the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Ministry, I need you to answer what people like Eugene Robinson and what TV commentators now are saying all the time. Although Israel may be justified, it is using far too much force against the Palestinian people.
I want to say a number of things. First of all, I want to take issue with one thing you said, and that is that Israel is causing civilian deaths. That is simply not true. The responsibility for civilian deaths in this conflict lies directly at the doorstep of Hamas. It is they who forced this conflict on us. We accepted 3 ceasefire proposals, one from the Egyptians, one from the United Nations, one from the International Red Cross, and implemented and abided by them. Hamas rejected all 3 and violated them. There's now a 4th conversation going on, and we'll hear in the coming hours what exactly happened. But this is a cynical killer strategy which is being put into place and rolled out by Hamas, which includes one gets the feeling, almost the desire to generate death on their own side in order to wage a public relations war against Israel. Look, the question of excessive force and the question of proportionality is an important one. I will say this to you. The Israeli military operates 100% within the dictates of international humanitarian law. There is a very careful apparatus in place for the selection of military targets with legal advice, with judicial oversight, multiple layers of intelligence, but it's not a pure science. And as we speak right now, there is some bitter fighting going on, including under the ground in these terror tunnels, and the government of Israel has an obligation, as was said just 2 days ago by the Secretary General of the United Nations who came to Israel, and he said, standing next to the Prime Minister of Israel, that the situation is intolerable and that no country could be expected to accept the kind of indiscriminate attack through the rockets on its civilians. And that's the Secretary General of the United Nations speaking. We have an obligation to defend the public and to bring a sense of calm. There is a stark threat, and the measurement of proportionality in international law is the use of the relevant amount of force in order to do away with a very real threat. It is not for want of trying that Hamas has not killed hundreds, if not more than that, people in Israel. The fact that we have invested significant time and effort and resources in developing a defense regime around the public is the only reason why Hamas has not succeeded in killing hundreds of people, if not thousands of people in Israel. Over 2,000 rockets have been fired into Israel. And what have they done at the same time? Hamas has taken, assessed today at over $1.2 billion, not million, billion, over $1.2 billion, and poured it underground to build a terror infrastructure, tunnels which traverse many of them, which traverse the international frontiers and come up through tunnel shafts underneath kindergartens in Israel, underneath dining rooms in the kibbutzim and the moshavim, in the collective communities down there in the south of Israel, purely with the intention of wreaking havoc and mayhem and murder. They could have built hospitals and schools, and then they could have built bomb shelters had they thought that Israel were aggressive. But the exact opposite is what they want. We are taking unprecedented steps in an incredibly difficult scenario to minimize and to limit civilian casualties on both sides of this conflict. But there is no guarantee that when you're up against a cynical terror organization who wants to generate death on both sides, that every civilian is going to be excluded from the fighting. And the sad part, the great tragedy of what's going on here, is that we're seeing too many civilians being killed. Mm-hmm. That's why we accept ceasefire proposals. That's why we didn't want to be in this conflict. But we have no choice. We have an obligation at this point when we've all seen exactly how evil this monster is that's emerged from underground. we need to pursue them and to ensure that we're at a point where for an incredibly long period of time, they will not be able to target our civilians.
I want to make sure you understand the things you said now, which you said beautifully, are things we've been saying on Shalom TV day after day after day. And I often begin whatever program we do on a daily basis by reminding people that every single Palestinian casualty, injury or death, every single one, is on the head of Hamas, not on the head of Israel. And that, as you point out, Hamas has had numerous opportunities for a ceasefire, which Israel accepted and the Hamas did not. And it pains me, Paul, it pains me that any American newspaper or any American television or radio does not begin by setting that, whatever's happening in that context. This, to me, is the most overarching reality.
I would, if I could, I just want to say, I mean, I think it's a little bit early to reach a conclusion about the media coverage of this particular conflict. I've been through a couple of rounds, sadly, in terms of working with the media during conflicts that Israel is involved in. I have a sense that there is far more of an understanding of the dilemma which Israel faces than in the past. And I think we need to wait until this is all over and we can analyze as do the statisticians all the number of minutes on each channel and who spoke and how much they spoke and what went. I can tell you that there are a significant number of the international media down there in Gaza. If you follow them on Twitter, you will see that they are they're covering both sides of the story. Sometimes the editorial board back home sees it a little bit differently, but the journalists are doing a splendid job, and they're coming under threat from people in Gaza, particularly from Hamas and the terror organizations, and they're facing a tough battle. There are, of course, those that are not necessarily excited about their coverage, but for the most part, I wouldn't yet reach a conclusion about how the international media have covered this conflict.
Okay, look, you and I are really getting to know each other for the first time, unfortunately because of this conflict. And I've been very, very impressed by you both in terms of your intellect, and you seem to be a very lovely person. And I always tell our producers, please see if you can get me Paul. And
thank you.
When you describe what's going on in Israel, you know, that's where you are and that's what you know, and I trust your perspective virtually 100%. I say this now very gently and really with all respect. I'm here in America, Paul. I'm monitoring, I am monitoring, I can't talk about the international media. I'm talking about American television. The most popular morning show in America is Morning Joe on MSNBC.
Correct.
I'll be happy to send you video of their report today. And they only have a reporter in Gaza, and they have a roundtable discussion, and they have a host who is basically anti-Israel, Brzezinski's daughter, and the entire slant, even when it comes to Eugene Robinson, is that Israel has gone too far. All we see right now are the casualties and the death and the children in hospitals, Palestinian hospitals, and mothers. There was not one visual today, by the way, not one, Paul, from the state of Israel. So I understand you're in a tricky position. You're a spokesperson for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Ministry, and it's nice for you to say nice things about the general foreign press. But I'm sorry, you are seriously mistaken about what's going on American television, on MSNBC, on CNN. Fox, by the way, after not even paying attention to this for days and days and days and days, has some very positive things to say about Israel, although their leading news talk show, Bill O'Reilly's The Factor, which airs at 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. every night on Fox, is the most watched cable news show on American television, doesn't deal with this day after day after day after day. And the problem you face, and again, what I was saying to you was, I applaud what you say. I try to make this point, that Hamas bears the responsibility. The reality is there's a visual being seen every single day on American television, and then there are people like Eugene Robinson who are writing in the prestigious papers of America, and they have one theme, and you, as a spokesperson for the Israeli government, has to understand this. The message right now is, whether Israel is justified or not in trying to make the Hamas rockets stop, and what Eugene Robinson says today, Paul, those rockets are ineffective. Nobody dies, nobody gets hurt. It's not only that you have bomb shelters, the rockets I'm almost done. No, let me finish and then I'll shut up. Not only does Israel have the ability to send a rocket with a GPS address, Hamas has rockets that they have no idea where they're even going to go. So the American media is now saying the rockets aren't so bad, Israelis aren't dying, and as bad as it is for Israel to live with the anxiety of this attack from Hamas, the reality is Israelis are not dying, but they're causing death. And you and the people and your colleagues in every information avenue for the state of Israel cannot say to me, the media is doing a good job, because at the moment, Paul, it's not. Right now, it's doing a hatchet job on Israel.
I have to take you up on this. We are fully aware of what is being broadcast in North America. Don't forget that probably close to 10% of our diplomatic assets are in North America. We have the embassy in Washington. We have 9 consulates in the United States. We have an embassy and 2 consulates in Canada. Of course, we also have the mission to the United Nations in New York. We have a significant investment in North America in diplomatic assets, and we're following carefully and closely, and we know exactly what's being said there, as we are in Europe, Asia, Africa, and elsewhere around the world. I don't for a moment believe that the media is 100% behind Israel, and I'm fully aware of the fact that there's a lot of coverage which is antagonistic towards Israel. So I'm fully aware of that. I also have figures which I'm not at liberty to share with you about how many minutes most of the significant, the important channels around the world, TV channels around the world, are devoting to the subject. How many minutes they're devoting to it every day compared to previous occasions, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, and other. How many minutes Israeli spokespersons are on, and how many minutes the Palestinian spokespersons or supporters are on. We're following this very carefully, monitoring it extremely carefully, and I can tell you that I agree with you. There is a lot of stuff there that we're not happy about. But I think that when you see people like the Secretary General of the United Nations come out and say publicly just 2 days ago that the situation is intolerable, and that Israel, like any other country in the world, cannot be expected to not defend itself. When you see the United Nations twice in the last week condemn Hamas for locating missiles and in schools, and the United Nations turn around and say that Hamas is turning schools into military targets. This is being reported. It is out there. People are seeing it. People are reading it. I think you have to understand that the media, first of all, the visual pictures, you're correct. It's an issue. Thankfully, there are not those visual pictures for us to get from the Israeli side, and that's because we've invested so much in a defense mechanism. And it goes one step further, and that is that our soldiers who are hospitalized, and there's sadly a growing number of them, we are not giving access to the media to speak to our soldiers. It's simply not who we are. It's not what we do. It would be the easiest thing in the world for us right now to contact hundreds of journalists that are in Israel
right at this very moment and take them on some kind of a tour of the hospitals where our soldiers have been hospitalized, and let them speak to them and hear the horrors of what's going on in Gaza and underneath Gaza. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. These people are entitled to their privacy and their dignity, and they're entitled to recover from their wounds without being used as a public relations weapon. And if we have to pay a little price on the public relations front in order to be able to maintain our set of values, our basket of values, then so be it. That is who we are, and that is how we will move forward. And so at the end of the day, yes, perhaps my life will be a little bit harder because I'm the person who has to stand in front of the camera. That's okay.
What happens right after that, and we decided to just cut it for time, is that Paul suddenly has a siren go off. He hears a siren go off, and he is told to immediately get off the phone and go to a bomb shelter. And we have to immediately stop the program. So it cuts off before really he and I concluded the conversation. And again, none of us has to live that way in America today. None of us have children who have to live that way. And in the end, every moral person of conscience has to say, every Palestinian death, while tragic, is justifiable in a defensive war. And every Palestinian death is on the head of Hamas. Israel does not have to apologize. And at some point, American news commentators, journalists have to say it. They have to say loud and clear, it's not acceptable to blame Israel for a war they didn't start. And lo and behold, there are casualties. They're tragic, but it's not Israel's fault. Now, there's a second issue I'd like to share with you today. You know, this coming Monday, there's going to be a huge rally in support of Israel, 12:30 in the afternoon, here in New York City at Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza on 2nd Avenue and 57th Street in Manhattan. Shalom TV will be there to cover the event, and so you'll be able to see it later on Shalom TV, but it's more important that as many of you as can possibly be there, that you're there to participate in a community show of support for Israel. That's Monday, 12:30 p.m., Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, 2nd Avenue and 57th Street. And there are rallies like this taking place all over America. But at a community-wide rally in support of Israel this past weekend that took place in Boston, one Jewish group pulled out, refused to participate. J Street pulled out of the event in Boston and did not participate. For Alan Dershowitz, who's long opposed J Street, this was sort of, the last straw. And Alan has written a very strong piece saying that J Street no longer has the right to call itself pro-Israel because it pulled out of a pro-Israel rally. Again, a few moments ago, I spoke with Alan. Here's my conversation with him. First of all, Alan, thank you again for joining us. I always appreciate your making time for us.
Well, I'm always happy to be on with you. I wish it were during a happier occasion. Yes. We could be celebrating some good things. What's going on in the Middle East, obviously, is just awful.
Well, we look forward to that in the near future, hopefully. Look, I wanted to talk to you about the piece you published earlier this week, in which you basically said, Alan, that J Street has written itself out of the Jewish tent. From your perspective, they did it in a way that was sort of transparent. I want you to summarize, A, what upset you about what J Street did, and what do you think the implications are?
Well, I think J Street has written itself out of the pro-Israel community. Nobody has the right to tell anybody else who's in the Jewish tent. But
yes,
they're not entitled to use the phrase pro-Israel, pro-peace. They're not pro-Israel. If you can't join together in a unity demonstration of support for Israel at a time like this, when rockets are flying over Israeli cities, when tunnels are being built to try to kill as many civilians as possible, and when Israeli soldiers are dying to defend Israel, when you can't join together in a community-wide demonstration of support for Israel at a time like this, you have taken yourself out of the pro-Israel group. They are the Switzerland of the Jewish community at this point, neutral, because they have some people in their group. Some of their members actively support Hamas. Some of their members support Israel. Many of their members are neutral. Many of their members are very, very critical of Israel. But they have a hard left group that actually supports Hamas, actually doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist, including one of their own founders, and doesn't believe in the two-state solution. And in order to maintain their constituency, they want to have as large a membership as possible, as far left as they can reach and as far center as they can reach. They are prepared to not join in support for Israel at a time like this, and that marks the death knell of J Street. It's over. It cannot any longer claim to be a pro-Israel organization, and I have urged all pro-Israel members of J Street to resign and to come back and join in the pro-Israel community, dissent, join me in calling for a two-state solution, calling for the end of many of the settlements on the West Bank. Yeah, that's fine. But if you can't join in a demonstration in support of Israel during a time of crisis, you're just not pro-Israel.
Mm-hmm. Now, Alan, in your piece, you were fair in that you gave the answers that J Street was using for why it pulled out of the Boston rally. You then responded, but
they're just a pack of lies. I mean, let's put it as bluntly as possible. They said they were backing out because there would be no voice in support of the civilians of Gaza. And, of course, Barry Schrage, who's the head of the Federation in Boston, is one of the most sympathetic people to the plight of the Palestinians. He mentioned it in his speech, as did virtually all the other speakers. So J Street just lied. They had to find an excuse because they had to patronize their hard-left constituency. What happened is when they agreed to join, they originally agreed to join the demonstration.
Yes.
Then their hard-left people said, oh, no, we're not letting J Street lend his name to support of Israel. No. We're on Hamas's side. And so J Street had to find an excuse for getting out, and they got out. The important thing you have to know, too, is when J Street was first founded, they said they want to represent the left in Israel. You know, the people in Israel who are loyal, who are Zionists, who support Israel, but who are critical of Israel's policies. Well, let me tell you, nobody in Israel today is afraid to show unity with the Israeli military at this point during a time of crisis. The left in Israel is supportive of this. I had dinner with the head of the opposition, Herzog, just recently when I was in Israel. He is completely supportive of this. So J Street has now abandoned any pretense of representing the left in Israel or the Tzipi Livni faction in Israel. She's completely supportive of the Israeli government on this. And for J Street to separate itself out and to refuse to support a pro-Israel demonstration, by the way, the people who started the demonstration went out of their way not to have anybody controversial speaking, not to have anybody who is supportive of the settlements or supportive of, the extreme right or the extreme left. They wanted a centrist group to make what I call the 80% case for Israel, the support for what virtually everybody in Israel supports. But J Street wouldn't be part of that. Goodbye to J Street. It's over. And any person who belongs to J Street now, after this, cannot look me in the eye and say I am pro-Israel. You're not. At least you belong to an organization which is not.
By the way, help me understand. I understand a lot of what you say J Street has either stood for and what its history is. On what are you basing the point that there are actually J Street members who support Hamas?
Well, you just go to a J Street convention, and you see signs, you see individuals, you know people who are there who are supportive of Hamas. I'm not saying that their leadership is. No, they're not. But they try to attract the widest array of members from the left, including people from organizations that overtly support Hamas and oppose Israel's right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people. So, if the leadership had any guts, and they don't, Jeremy Ben-Ami himself supports Israel. He doesn't have any courage because he doesn't want to alienate anybody from the hard left. He's a coward, and he wants to be a macha. He wants to have the biggest organization there is, and so he refuses to draw any lines in the sand. Even when he draws lines, they're wiggly lines. You know, well, we don't really support DBS, but we'll have speakers who support DBS. Let me give you another example. I have asked J Street over and over again to allow me to speak to its members. And I obviously represent the center. I'm not a right-winger. I'm opposed to Israel's settlement policies, favor the two-state solution. They will not allow me to speak to their membership, but they do allow Hamas people to speak to their membership, people who are against Israel, people who favor BDS. They have an open tent, but the open tent is on one side, the left side. The tent is not open in the middle. They will not allow centrists like me to speak at their organization. They want freedom of speech for them, but they would deny me freedom to speak to their members.
Well, you tell us something that's very, very important, and I appreciated the article, and it's very kind of you to give me a moment here. While I have you, I want to ask you one more legal-type question.
Sure.
To what extent if a nation fires a rocket across an international border, to what extent is that a formal act of war which entitles the receiving country, the country that is being attacked or has this rocket landed in it, to what extent is that a formal act of war?
Well, there's no doubt about that. Nobody would deny that. Ban Ki-moon acknowledged it. Even the Human Rights Council has to acknowledge that, of course, firing a rocket, if it's done by the officials in charge, is an act of war. If it's done by some soldier without authorization, that's different. But this is Hamas' policy to fire thousands of rockets. So, of course, they are at war with Israel, and Israel's entitled to employ whatever sanctions it has in defense. Now, Israel must comply with the rules of proportionality, but most people don't understand what those rules mean. It doesn't mean that for every soldier killed, there has to be one Palestinian killed, or for every 10 Palestinians who die, you have to have 10 Israelis who die. It has nothing to do with proportionality. Proportionality is very simple. The first element of it is the target has to be a military target. So let's assume that they're using a mosque from which to fire rockets. That becomes a military target. Ban Ki-moon said that yesterday, that as soon as they put weapons in a school or in a church, a mosque, or in a hospital, it becomes a military target. Israel is entitled to attack military targets. But in doing so, it must weigh the importance of the military target against the likelihood of civilian casualties, and there has to be a sense of proportion so that, for example, a tunnel that's built underground and could result in the death of hundreds of Israelis, hundreds, maybe thousands of Israelis if you have multiple tunnels. A tunnel has an extraordinarily high military value, and if it requires the killing of some civilians who are human shields, in the process of destroying that tunnel, that satisfies the rule of proportionality. The rule of proportionality has nothing to do with the number of people killed on each side. It has only to do with whether or not the civilian deaths are proportional to the value of the military target. And under that criteria, Israel acts well within the rules of proportionality. In fact, it frequently refuses to attack military targets because in its own view, the proportions would be wrong, or in its own view, there might be one or two children involved. Now, mistakes happen. Look, so many of the Israeli soldiers who've died in this war have died from friendly fire. That proves that, no country is perfect. In the fog of war, you kill your own soldiers, and you kill civilians on the other side. That's inevitable, particularly when Hamas uses human shields to protect its own rockets.
Okay. I want you then to comment on one more aspect of what you've just described. And Alan, you have been associated with, you have been both subject of, and you have been a media person for years and years and years. And, I remember when every single night you were on, it was then CNBC during the O.J. Simpson trial. You've been on television. As long as you had a career, you have experienced how the media works. I want to know how you feel now about the way in which the media is portraying over and over again. On the one hand, there are Israelis who are not dying in Israel, but the visuals, Alan, are of this school that it looks like an Israeli missile may have hit this school, killed some 15 people. Some of them are children. You've got the UN guy in front of the building saying, you know, we gave the GPS coordinates to Israel. They knew that this was a safe haven.
And that's why they warned him 2 days earlier to get out, because the UN haven was being used, the area around it, to fire at Israeli soldiers.
Let me just finish.
And Israel gave 2 days of warning, and
let me just finish
one
second. Let me just finish the idea. The idea here is I'm watching MSNBC this morning, and the host, Brzezinski's daughter, is basically setting it up where even someone, and you know Eugene Robinson very well, who writes for the Wall Street Journal. Eugene Robinson is pro-Israel. But he is saying now on MSNBC, Morning Joe, Israel is going too far, and they are now basically they are being immoral in their use of power against Palestinian civilians.
Well,
what do you want us to know?
They're just dead wrong, and the media, of course, has to focus on visuals. And Hamas has a strategy. Hamas's strategy is to put as many civilians in harm's way as possible by using them as human shields, by having the tunnels, entrances in hospitals and schools and mosques and houses, and having their rockets in houses and mosques and schools. Its purpose is to get Israel to kill as many Palestinian civilians as possible so that CNBC and CNN will have the visuals that they can show. The Palestinians then parade their dead children like trophies in front of the cameras and show the crying mothers, and they are genuinely crying mothers.
Yes,
mothers don't want their children to be killed. Hamas wants them to be killed, though. Hamas deliberately wants them to be killed. The media knows this. The media knows it's playing into Hamas's hands. The media knows that it is contributing to Hamas's using of human shields, but it wants to sell its soap. And the way it sells its soap is by showing pictures of dead babies and dead children and dead women and dead older people. And Hamas knows that. It knows what motivates the television stations, and the television stations know what motivates Hamas, and there's an evil cycle that occurs between the media and Hamas. The result is many, many more dead Palestinians than would have otherwise occurred.
Mm-hmm. It is evil in terms of the way the media is doing this.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Listen, it's always wonderful to talk to you. I hope you have a good rest of the summer. I hope, Alan, I don't have to keep calling you. And then, as you say, the next time I talk to you, it'll be for a good reason.
I hope so.
And in the meantime, I wish you all the best, you and your family. And I will chase you, and we'll talk again very soon.
Always happy to talk. Hopefully we'll talk when there's peace.
Thank you, Alan.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Be well.
Alan Dershowitz, raising some very important issues for us to consider, and always eloquent. By the way, I want to clarify one error I made when I was talking about Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. If you know New York City, you know it is on 2nd Avenue, but it's not 57th, it's 47th. So that 12:30 on Monday, 2nd Avenue and 47th Street in Manhattan, this fabulous community-wide show of support for State of Israel. Try to be there, 12:30 Monday, Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza, 2nd Avenue, 47th Street. There's somebody else I want to talk to right now who is a dear friend, and I have enormous regard for him. He is the associate editor of the Jewish Week, one of American Jewry's foremost journalists, Jonathan Mark, and he joins us now by phone from here in New York City. Jonathan, thank you again for giving me some time.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Jonathan, I wanted your take on the way in which you see the media now reporting on the Israeli-Hamas conflict, especially in light of Eugene Robinson's piece he writes for the Washington Post. I may have said the Wall Street Journal when I talked to Alan. He writes for the Washington Post, and he has a piece in which he's saying that Israel is using an immoral amount of military might against Hamas, and those are the visuals we see now, Jonathan, on American television. What's your take on it?
If Abraham Lincoln had this kind of logic, we'd still have slavery in New York, in America, and that's just how ridiculous it is. At a certain point, you're fighting to win a war, not to win miscongeniality. And when that's the case, they're going to, things aren't pretty. War is not pretty, and never was. And so there may be people who are pushing Israel to do something, But it's sort of like what Robinson's doing is sort of asking Israel, do you still beat your wife? And that becomes a discussion instead of what's going on here, or why this thing began in the first place.
Mm-hmm. What is the moral, the moral sort of extreme that Israel can use? Why, when I see the visuals, I'm a normal person. I'm pained for the Palestinian suffering. I'm really sorry for it. I say to myself, as an American and as a Jew, first of all, they could stop it anytime they want to. And second, in some way they've brought it on themselves, and all Israel is trying to do is protect its own people, and Israel has every right to do it, even if it means Palestinian suffering. That's my response when I watch it.
Right.
I want to tell me how do you feel, Jonathan, when you see this?
Well, what's interesting is that the media is not really selling itself to the American people. If you look at every single poll from Pew to Gallup to anybody, CNN, the American people overwhelmingly are supporting Israel.
Correct.
In every single American demographic. So really, Israel has been making the argument. Jewish papers and stations have been making their argument, and the American people are accepting it. So I don't see there's really a problem on the ground. That's the funny thing. I think Jews are very concerned about it, but if you look at all the polls, there's no indication that this is even close, except in one or two specific groups. Overwhelmingly, it's pro-Israel.
Okay, but do you worry that if the stories continue to be slanted as I see them slant, and if the visuals, we do not see Israeli suffering, and there is no suffering at the moment that is comparable in scope to the Palestinian suffering, if the visuals continue as they do, Jonathan, do you worry at all public opinion will be swayed against Israel?
No. And even though logic tells me yes, I just look at every single poll taken since 1967, and not once has the Palestinians overtaken the Israelis. Even after absolute disasters like Sabra and Shatila, Israel came out ahead in the polls. Right at that.
You're absolutely right. Then, Jonathan,
and if that's the case, then Americans are not that gullible and can sense what's right and what's wrong.
So, the media, as Alan Dershowitz just said, is trying to sell soap. Why is the media hammering away at Israel if, in fact, the vast majority of Americans are sympathetic to Israel despite the Palestinian pain? Why is the media doing this?
Well, what's interesting is that if you look at all the polls recently, like the Pew poll, the one segment of society that is not overwhelmingly supportive of Israel is the very liberal Democrat. And that's primarily who the media is comprised of. That's part one. And I think they're well-meaning people. I just think that it's misguided. But even in, so why are they doing it? I think there's I think, if they were like this about everything else around the world, I'd be more sympathetic to the truth of their emotion. But they're not. They're not covering the Congo this way. They're not covering, a lot of places around the world where civilians are dying. They didn't cover Afghanistan this way when many more civilians were dying. There seems to be a peculiar obsession with what Jews are doing when people in Gaza are not dying the way they are in other places. And also, when Hamas deliberately keeps their soldiers in civilian clothing, that throws the whole argument down as well.
Yes.
And it's an interesting, my friend and colleague J.J. Goldberg today pointed out that studies by UNICEF show that the average civilian toll in modern warfare is civilian toll is usually 80 to 90%. And the UN estimates the casualties in Gaza are 75 to 80%. They're less to the same as they are anywhere else.
By the way, we should say that as we're coming up to 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time today, Moshe Ayalon, the defense minister of Israel, has just told the IDF that they should now expect the ground offensive to be expanded. So whatever we've seen so far, it may expand, Jonathan. And I'm hoping you're right, and that the American people are not, in some way, I use the word seduced into swaying themselves against Israel. One more quick question for you on another topic, and you may have heard this as you were waiting to come on yourself. Alan Dershowitz came out with a piece this week in which he was very critical of J Street for pulling out of a Boston rally and claims that now J Street has no right to call itself pro-Israel. What's your take on this issue?
I agree with him 100% on that. At a certain point, you support the boys on the front, and you wait till later. You wait till the rockets stop and the bullets stop before you decide to renew these other earlier arguments. Mm-hmm. Even Charles Lindbergh, before World War II, when World War II, everybody knows how anti-American he was, isolationist he was before World War II. When the war started, he called up Roosevelt and he volunteered. Mm-hmm. This is what a patriot does, even at the extreme. Jonathan, and for J Street being unable to do this, I think it comes to the core of J Street, which people question their basic Yiddishkeit, their basic neshama.
I understand. You mentioned J.J. Goldberg a moment ago. He writes for The Forward in New York. There are two great papers, The Jewish Week and The Forward. The Forward is considered to be on the left, to the left of the Jewish Week. As you look at how the the Jewish media in America has dealt with this war, how do you evaluate it?
I think it's unfortunate, frankly. I'm not happy about it.
Because?
I think that there has been, in other words, we've accepted the argument that the civilians are an issue, which I don't think is the case. And so we've bought into that critique. And I think that there's I just don't think, I feel there's a disconnect from the soul of the Jewish people, what they're going through right now. And I think there could be a little bit more of that.
Okay. I need you to come in studio and discuss that whole theme with me. I think you do fabulous work. I love you very much. Thank you for making yourself available to me. You have a Shabbat Shalom. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Have a good Shabbos, and thank you for your kind words.
Thank you.
And for what you do, everything that you do.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan Mark, journalist, associate editor for The Jewish Week. And that sort of wraps this program up. This ends a week of programming that we've brought you here on Shalom TV. And in many ways, look, people are saying to all of us that Shalom TV is providing the only place on American television anywhere where we're day after day after day dealing with the issues and talking to the individuals who can really give us some perspective on the Israeli-Hamas conflict. My thanks, as always, to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, our producers, Ron Jacobson, Carol Lilienthal, and to all the people here, Tisha Bader, who does fabulous work in our news department, and the people in Master Control, Mark Baker and Corey Sivikoff. Thank you all. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.